so often, generosity has been hijacked as a financial transaction. It's, there's a generous person because they can write a check with lots of commas and lots of zeros. But the reality is when you study the gospel, you study scripture, you look at church history, you look at the idea of gospel patrons. I mean, you just see it salt and peppered everywhere, that the whole idea around generosity is really central to the gospel. In other words, when we think of Easter, Christmas, we think of Jesus, we read the Bible, we see all this stuff, we see a generous God. John 3:16 is a generosity verse. So we really adapted and adopted a more of a whole life generosity message.
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. Really stoked everybody's here listening to the podcast, hearing all the cool things we talk about, social enterprise, impact investing, everything in between. And I'm so excited to finally get this one on the books. It has taken us a while, Stephan and Laurie, to get this scheduled, but been able to really network and get involved in the South Florida I'll just call it the business community, but then the ministry community as well. And I've just been super impressed over the years. So Stephan, Laurie, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to dig in with you guys.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah. So NCF South Florida, National Christian Foundation South Florida, there's probably some terminology here that we need to get. So maybe Stephan, you can kind of kick us off with just a slight hit of your background and where you come from and all that. And then what NCF South Florida is and what you guys are about and how that even fits into the national structure too.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I'm the co-founder and the president of the National Christian Foundation South Florida office. I come back, I've had sort of a mixed background, degrees in finance, been involved in some business, but I would say I'm much more heavily weighted coming out of the nonprofit church world. I'm an ordained pastor. Some find that hard to believe. I do once in a while. My family certainly does. But as we came together about 20 years ago, a group of business people came together with this idea of what would it be like to start a community foundation, which many communities have, that was based on Judeo-Christian values. We did not know what the National Christian Foundation was or that even existed, but we took about a year to do some due diligence and came across this wonderful organization that had been started about 40 years ago now, that was started by the late Larry Burkett. Those of you that are old or listening will remember he's sort of like the Dave Ramsey of old. He was one of the first radio guys that would talk about giving and stewardship and budgets and debt and all that fun stuff. And then there was another guy named Ron Blue. Ron Blue is a financial advisor, and he was sort of the go-to guy in the Christian world, that Christian business people who needed someone to invest their money for them or help them manage their estate. Ron Blue was sort of the, high water mark, blue chip. He's still around. Ron Blue is still around. And then there's a guy named Terry Parker, who was an attorney, and those three gentlemen were just friends living in Atlanta. And it was sort of like a good joke. There was an accountant, there was a financial advisor, and there was a lawyer. And they get together. And that was basically the early genesis of what has now become the National Christian Foundation, which is the top 5 largest charities in the country. And so when we were doing our due diligence in South Florida on that original question of what would it look like if we opened a community foundation based on Judeo-Christian values, we came across the National Christian Foundation and go, hey, those guys have a head start. They know what they're doing. They've figured out all the mechanics, all the due diligence, all the compliance issues with the government and the IRS, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have to do any of that. Why don't we just tether ourselves to those guys? And so they were looking for affiliate offices. We were looking for the proverbial mothership. Yep. And so that was the marriage made in heaven. And that's been 20 years. So that in essence, think of a foundation, a community foundation where individuals come to us. They open an account, it's like opening up a checking account. You open an account and that therefore you do all your charitable giving through that. And there's all these wonderful amazing strategies and tools and et cetera, et cetera. But generally think of it, whether you're uber wealthy or you just have a generous heart and God, you don't have a lot of money, but you're just really generous. We serve that clientele. And they come to us, they open an account, and basically we become their staff and they do their giving through us. So that's the general idea. And we have a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think that last statement is the most true of everything you said, because anytime I've interacted, it's been fun. It's been great. So Laurie, why don't you hop in really quick, share a little bit of your background, how you got involved then. And then I've got a load of questions for you guys and fun things to talk about.
Okay. Well, I was a busy corporate executive, kind of doing my own thing, and started having this conversation with God about how much is enough. And the questions were like, how much time away from your family, how much money, how much status, and I was very successful, but feeling very empty. And I decided to take a year sabbatical, and I was determined to volunteer locally, go on mission trips, just kind of figure out what God was talking to me about. And it was during that time that I was introduced to the National Christian Foundation, South Florida. Never heard of them, even though they lived in I lived in the community, didn't know anything about them. And someone invited me to Life Work Leadership, which is a faith and work initiative that we do. And I realized that there was something going on here. I was able to, I jumped in this room and there was like-minded people, that love the Lord, but business people that spoke my language. And I had never met anybody like that before in my professional career. So I knew right then that I was going to be involved somehow, not that I was just going to go through Life Work Leadership and then go on and do my own thing, that I would be involved. And at some point, Stephan asked me to join the board, and I got more engaged. And then I was having a liquidity transaction because I decided to leave my corporate job. And so I had this executive package, and I learned about NCF and the capabilities that you could actually give your stock and your options to NCF and not pay the taxes on the appreciation. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. First, I questioned whether it was legal or not. I'm like, really? Yeah, legit. And I had my people talk to their people and found out it was. And that really started me on my generosity journey. I'm somewhat of a generosity junkie now, because I always thought I was generous. I would, I'd write the big checks in my mind, big checks, at different events. But having my fund at NCF just gave me this sense of freedom that when I would come across a larger opportunity that in the past I would have said no, frankly, because, I got to, move something around. I don't have that kind of money in my checking account. Now I was able to give joyously and freely. And it was like, oh God, that's what you were talking about a charitable giver. Now I get it. So that kind of hooked me. And then Stephan and I started working together on some strategy projects and different things that were going on. And lo and behold, now I'm here full time. I don't know how that happened, but here I am.
Stephan's convincing, I guess, on that.
It was the salary package.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was it.
Big bucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, so kind of diving in, the first maybe thing to talk about, maybe just give people a landscape of the stuff you guys are doing. This whole social enterprise impact investing world, I mean, it's really a trifecta of three things in my mind. One being like a true integrated faith and work theology that someone needs to have just to understand, wow, this stuff connects. And then connecting that, wow, the business world could actually do more good maybe than the ministry world sometimes, because the utilization of the global economic marketplace, like look at the huge impact we have. And then starting to say, wow, I'm going to look at my whole portfolio and my whole all the resources I've financially been given to steward, not just this small tithe piece or not just the part that's my charitable capital, but holistically looking at this and then saying impact invest. And so if those are kind of the three buckets, one of the things I respect about you guys is you're doing stuff to encourage people in impact investing. You're doing life work leadership on the faith and work side. You're involved in the business community and even I would say redeeming the business community. And there's people we both know that in the business community in South Florida that have come to know the Lord as a result of you guys, which is so cool. So maybe we can break down those three pieces and just what you guys are doing in that and some of your philosophies around why you got involved in it. And maybe we'll start with the life work leadership piece, which Laurie, I believe is kind of in your court, but if it's in Stephan's, you can answer that too. But tell me a little more about life work leadership and what that is for you guys down there.
Well, Stephan is really kind of the founder of that. And we've been doing it for 17 years now. So when I joined, it was already in full swing. And so I'll let Stephan kind of talk about how that got started and why.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks. The same thing of doing something for 17 years. I'm thinking all of a sudden, like my back started hurting, my neck's had a crick. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm an old man. So back in the day, I would say that, basically as an organization, we're in the generosity space. Well, then what does that really mean? And so often, generosity has been hijacked as a financial transaction, it's, there's a generous person because they can write a check with lots of commas and lots of zeros. But the reality is when you study the gospel, you study scripture, you look at church history, you look at the idea of gospel patrons. I mean, you just see it salt and peppered everywhere, that the whole idea around generosity is really central to the gospel. In other words, when we think of Easter, Christmas, we think of Jesus, we read the Bible, we see all this stuff, we see a generous God. John 3:16 is a generosity verse. So we really adapted and adopted a more of a whole life generosity message, in essence saying, yeah, generosity does involve your money. I mean, we live in a world that, the world goes around with money. I mean, we need money to do transactions. It takes money to, build homes for the disadvantaged and do crisis relief and, go on down the list. So that's one spot, one area that we focus on. And obviously that's our partnership with the National Christian Foundation. And that's where Laurie leads that initiative. And that's how we help the people we come across in terms of how can you experience in your own life what Laurie just did a great job experiencing that happened in her life. And so that's that part. But as we began developing these wonderful, intimate, trusted relationships with these people that came and said, hey, help me as I go on this giving journey, we began to realize that, the scope of their desires was far larger than just let me go to a fundraiser event or let me be able to, give money. That was, again, a part of it. But they would say to us, honestly, look, I devote 60, 70, 80 hours a year, a day, a week to my work life. I'm passionate about it. I dream about it. I've devoted my entire life to this. I've educated around it. I love my work. I love my business. And yet, when I try to integrate my faith, I've got this faith thing going on over here, but it's compartmentalized. Barna talks about the compartmentalization of our faith and work, the whole sacred secular conversation. I think that's one of the reasons this podcast is so important, is that you're trying to break down that wall. And so as we began to be exposed to these men and women, these wonderful people, they would come to us and going, help me understand how to incorporate my faith in my work. I don't really know what that means. or I'm trying to figure that out, or I want to meet other people like me and I don't know how to do it. I'm not meeting them at the Chamber of Commerce. I'm not meeting them at the cocktail hour. I'm not meeting them at my conferences. I've got my church world, and that's great, but it doesn't really address some of my business challenges and concerns, issues, and so on. So that's when we were introduced to Life Work Leadership. It was an organization out of Orlando, Florida. It used to be called Golf, like the game of golf, the Greater Orlando Leadership Foundation. And they were interested in exporting their model. We were interested in importing their model. We had to change the name. And we were their first export, and they were our first import. And that was something we started 17 years ago, of creating a 8-month, half a day a month experience for people to not only build a network, be challenged, be encouraged, grow, but really begin to identify their calling and live in that calling, and begin to say, here's how I can incorporate my faith in my work. And just like you said, let's move away from this compartmentalization and saying, I'm not just a Christian when I walk into my church or I sit on some committee somewhere. As a follower of Christ, I do this 24/7, which I think is screaming loud and clear nowadays, because people see the discrepancies or the hypocrisy of, hey, you go to church on Sunday, but you're a jerk the rest of the week, and then we got the guys, our testimony is what we do 24/7. So
Totally.
So that was the birth of that. And then it has all kinds of wonderful tentacles. Since then, we've adopted a Convene, which is a CEO forum group. And we've just adopted that about 2 years ago inside our ecosystem to serve basically more the business owner. So we're having fun. Like you said earlier, we try to incorporate strategy, but we want to make it life-giving. Yeah.
Well, and a couple of things you said, going back to your comment that people they can go to chamber events and networking events and all that stuff. And they're like, I'm meeting people, but they're not quite my people. I've experienced that in the church too, where I'm like, these are my people, but I have a business mind and they're also not quite my people, even though they are. And it's kind of weird to say it that way, but and I think that's one of the toughest things for pastors is if a pastor goes to seminary and they're never in the business world, and then they're expected to stand up and preach about faith and work on a Sunday. And so I love organizations like Made to Flourish and some of those out there that are trying to equip pastors on how do you even talk about this? But I think the reality is a place to come together and have those conversations and wrestle with that stuff where people just get it is really, really important. And the other thing I want to kind of call out as you guys do is, and 17 years is a decently long time, right? But you guys really care about relationships and you treat it like an ecosystem, because there's a way to say, all right, cool, let's check the box. Let's push, 500 people through this program over these few years. But one of the things that I think is present down there is it's deep, long, hard, grinding relationships. And that's where real change happens. And I think you guys have seen the fruit of that now, 17 years later, that you've got this amazing community down there that's pretty impactful and pretty cool. And so kudos to you guys on that. But I think that's been intentional, and that's how you guys kind of do things.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has been intentional. I sometimes think we just, fall into things and I honestly, without
a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it without being, sound like super spiritual. I mean, you do see the handiwork of God, but it's like, God expects us to show up and plow the field. And then as the Bible says, that's the harvest, the growth of the seed and is up to him. And then, the harvest is ready. So, there's this sense of total dependence on God for guidance and strategy and opportunity. I wish we had this beautiful map that I could show you that 20 years ago said exactly how we're going to do that.
Picture of a whiteboard in your office and it just went exactly how you planned.
Yeah. We don't. We have a nice little white paper that was actually prophetic, not even written by us, by somebody else that gave it to us, that we look back and we go, that's interesting. It's a prophetic, but it's a progressive revelation, which frankly is sort of the way we ought to live our lives. So relationships are key, and time is our friend. So many times we think, well, we got to do these things in 3-year increments or 5-year plans. We basically are saying, we're in this for the 30 plus, 40 plus years. So, and that's when you sometimes don't even see the fruit until 20 years later.
Yeah.
One thing I'd add, Ryan, is that, Stephan started out, it was just him and another person. And, they were just meeting people and establishing these relationships. And now all these years later, almost 20 years later, the relationships that they made in the early days down in Miami and in Palm Beach and over in Naples, those guys are still at the table.
Yeah.
They've been in it for the long haul with us. And now we actually have satellite offices in all those regions. And all of that just came about in the last 5 years. So, but we stand on the shoulders of those that went before us, and then just the faithfulness of the people that we've been doing life with all these years.
Yeah.
Well, we also don't. I was going to say, when they join the table, we also don't let them leave. So that's part of the reason they're still there. When they say, "Hey, I want to leave," I go, "I'm sorry, you can't." It's
also kind of hard to leave. Like, I mean, I wouldn't even say that I'm at the table with you guys in that way, but I feel a connection to down there. Like, I got to go to South Florida a couple of times a year. I don't want to lose that. It's so special. Like, I want to be a part of that community, and it's really cool. So I think that's how it should be. And what I was going to say too, like, multiplication is a strategy, and it's also a fruit, right? And so seeing that multiply, seeing other offices open up, that's just a fruit of the hard work that's happening. And if you went back and designed the perfect roadmap, it would probably have multiplication in there. And so I think that's a cool testament to that stuff working. So yeah, I love, there's organizations doing faith and work stuff all over the world, all over the country, and they're all doing it in unique ways. And I think you guys are a unique way that's happening, and it's pretty special. All right, everyone, I want to take a quick break from today's episode and just share a little bit about Impact Foundation, who's got an incredibly awesome model of using impact investment, charitable dollars, and funding tons of projects all over the world right now. What if your investments could change the world? At Impact Foundation, they believe business with purpose has the power to transform society. Purpose-built for impact investing, Impact Foundation provides a streamlined way to fund businesses that seek social and spiritual transformation or make loans to charity, all while earning a financial return to grow your giving. Donors and investors have already supported more than 200 redemptive enterprises through their impact accounts. They provide needed fuel for companies that exist as a force of God's redemptive work in the world. To learn more about what they're doing in their Kingdom Impact Investing model, visit impactfoundation.org. So shifting then into, we'll talk about social enterprise. So this really blend of ministry and business. And I'm not talking about a theological or an internal one person's philosophical theological approach to it, but actually seeing ministry and business come together, seeing things like Live the Life, use an earned income strategy to where they're not fundraising their whole strategy, seeing something like Saints of Florida, having this huge impact, but being a for-profit. You guys are having a lot of that happen. And there's these little pockets around the country. Every city all over the place has that happening. And there's Denver, obviously, where I'm at, has a lot of that stuff. And there's pockets of it. One of the interesting things down by you guys is actually the depth that the church is involved. I think that's a unique piece of how it's happening there, because all over there's people saying, hey, business ministry, we're going to hire people out of incarceration, homeless addiction, all that kind of stuff. That's happening. The local church, I feel, is more involved in that story in South Florida. So maybe instead of just talking about that in general, maybe talking about how has the church, like what's been part of the church's story down there, that it's grasped this and said, oh, we get it, and then gotten involved in it from your guys' perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at that. And because I don't think it's a simple, one or two kind of things. There's a couple of things that I sort of come to my mind as I just sort of rise to the surface when I think of that. Generally speaking, when we first started this initiative, the idea of engaging with the local church was always core to us in the sense that we serve the local church, we serve the bride of Christ, we adore the bride of Christ. We would pull pastors together just to have lunches and love on them and, those kind of things. Generally speaking, the pastoral world didn't really understand who we were. The initial narrative could be, so you guys deal with wealthy people. They come to you, they do their giving through you. You know what? They're supposed to do their giving through me, the church, and I don't get it, so that kind of stuff. So We didn't try to convince them that's a problem. I mean, we just kept loving on them and saying, look, we're going to prove you wrong, because we actually we provide tools that can help and augment the local church. And again, we exist to serve the local church. The day we don't exist to serve the local church is the day we close the door. So there was a part of our ethos was we're church lovers. Probably in hindsight, didn't really think of it initially, but the fact that I came at it personally, and I was employee number one, and came at it from a pastoral perspective, has always helped, because a lot of the initiatives that are similar to this, the people that lead them may come out of maybe, hey, I was into financial services, I was a lawyer, and I'm using those skill sets to use in this type of work, which is wonderful. In fact, we need them a lot, and we have them. In my particular case, it was more coming at it from a different perspective. So I think there was, again, always a deep sensitivity, like, hey, I'm one of you, we're here, we're to serve. I think the other thing, and it's a long path, the other thing too is when I look at our region, there's certain pockets that we have a really tight, wonderful relationship with churches. Others, it's a little bit more scattered. So, it would be erroneous to say, the entire South Florida community of churches are all, cheering and working together. I mean, it's a constant work. I don't think we'll ever be done. I mean, 2,000 years ago, scripture talked about the unity of the church. I mean, so it's something you can't afford not to keep working on. I would say where we're the strongest, and it's a really interesting principle, where we're the strongest is where it's been birthed out of pain and failure and suffering. In our community, and Laurie and I, our home office in the NCF is in the Fort Lauderdale Broward. So for you listeners that don't know the geography of Palm Beach, then you have Miami, and then in the middle between is this place called Fort Lauderdale. And that's where our office is, so we can serve our entire region. But we had, 8 years ago, 2 significant blow-ups of very prominent pastors in our community, well-loved in our community, that were either caught or admitted to, well, I guess they were both caught in having an extramarital affair or affairs. And that sent shockwaves to the Christian community, like, oh my gosh, that person was unfaithful to their wife. And so it caused pastors to do a lot of introspection, like, hey, having the name pastor in front of me, it doesn't really mean a good thing anymore. It's like, well, what are you hiding? What kind of hypocrite are you? Wow. So the bride of Christ took a hit. And I think out of that created a sense of urgency that says, like, hey, we've got to get together. We got to get on our face before the Lord. We've got to demonstrate what a unified church looks like. How do we care for each other as pastors? But even beyond that, what do we start doing to change the narrative? And unfortunately, doesn't seem a week doesn't go by that some high profile church or church movement blows up because of immorality. Yeah. And so that has been a major concern of ours that says, look, we can talk generosity all day long and donor advised funds and millions of dollars and chicken dinners and golf tournaments and all this great stuff. But if we, the church, aren't actually acting like the church, it's all for naught. And when I mean the church, I don't mean the building with the white steeple. I mean, the 3 of us, we're part of the church. We're the body of Christ. So that was sort of, it's a belabored answer, but I think it's an important answer to say that was really, some of the core tenets of, well, why is it somewhat sticky and good with the church in this community? And I would say those are some of the elements. I think Laurie could probably have some other perspectives, because I think she's come into it from a different pathway, and may have some other things that she's observed.
Yeah. Well, and Laurie, before you say that, one thing I was just going to share before to what you said, Stephan, is it almost, that scenario forces a different type of the church existing, like having to go out and be in the community and not wait for the community to come to it. And that looks like starting a restaurant. That looks like having a church service in a different place. And as the church needs to become more fiscally self-sustaining sometimes, obviously there's a place for tithing in that, but in certain communities, in certain areas, and I think you can look at Barna research of how much millennials give versus other generations, like that can be a challenge for church plants in terms of how fiscally self-sustaining they are. There's cool opportunities to do that. So all that together like shows me, oh, that's some of where people said, oh, maybe there's a different way to do this. And oh, here's a business opportunity and this things start to line up. And that make hearing some of that story from you makes a lot of sense as I look at the types of enterprises doing that work down there. But yeah, Laurie, your thoughts on that too, for sure.
Yeah, well, one of the other things that exists down here that I haven't seen in other places is the church network coming together for the sake of mission and nonprofits. So our local nonprofits, they have connections with more than one church. So it's not like a church has a pet project, right? It's all the churches are pouring in, or a lot of the churches are pouring into these different initiatives. So when there is an idea for like an impact investment, you already got the buy-in of the church because they've been working with them for years. And I think that's really unique in our community.
Yeah. And I've seen that for sure. And I think that's the ministry world and even the church world, but particularly the ministry nonprofit world, it is very fragmented and it isn't historically collaborative. You end up with 10 nonprofits raising money to do the same exact thing with a slight twist. And you find out that 2 of them were the same and they broke off for some difference. And that's okay. But also you're like, oh, is that really the most efficient way to deal with these like societal pains that we are trying to solve and trying to help? And so I think seeing the church come together and do that is actually really impactful and really necessary. And even in the impact investing space, we see this fund has this theory and that fund has that thing. You see that same kind of thing. And I've seen even the event that you guys did, the impact investing event last November was a case of, that was people from different churches, different backgrounds, and it was just a collaborative, like, yeah, I don't know, we as believers in this community have a responsibility to make the community better and serve people in it. And so let's all come together and figure it out. It wasn't hey, you figure this piece out and you're better at that one. It was a really collaborative approach, which is really cool. So yeah, it's been cool to see that. So I guess kind of the last piece to talk about then is the impact investing piece, because that's still new. I would say that if you walk into a church on a Sunday, maybe 1% of people like know what social enterprise or business for transformation is. And if you go to the smaller percentage of people that represent the wealth in the church, and then the small percentage of those that get impact investing, it's still small. So we have a lot of discipleship work to do in my mind. It's kind of a blue ocean of, man, look at the wealth in the church and look at the small percentage that knows about this stuff. So I guess talk to me about, for you guys, why impact investing is so important, because not every charity foundation, community foundation, not every NCF office, even not everybody is thinking about impact investing yet. And it's still kind of new. So what is it about impact investing that's so core to your guys' conviction as NCF South Florida that it's come to the forefront and you guys are getting involved in it so much?
I'll give you a macro answer, and then Laurie sort of takes point on most of that initiative because it falls under sort of her area, and she's shown also a lot of ingenuity and passion around it, so she can get a little bit more granular. For me, as an organization, one of the things that happens in the world of community foundations is their business models are set up around the idea that you set up this foundation, people come, open up their accounts, they deposit money in those accounts, and then a small percentage of that money then goes out to the various charities. And so what ends up happening is over time, those foundations end up having a huge base of assets, and then they make a small amount of money on those assets. And so as you begin to do the math, you can see some organizations that become quite large, and they've got hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases, billions of dollars under mass. They're making some money off of that. So it's a counterintuitive thing, like, hey, we're about generosity, but on the other hand, we really don't want people sending any checks out because then we don't make as much money. we recognize that early, that goes, guys, that cannot be our model. I mean, then we're wasting our time if we're going around saying, this is about the generosity of the church. As long as you don't give the money on, you just give it to us. And so we have, and actually our internal, and that's for another podcast, our internal business model or economic model, how we are sustained, is very different. In fact, about 25-30% of our income it comes from fees. The rest is other ways. So we're not highly dependent on those assets under management, which means that we really are very interested in how to deploy those assets under management. When a person opens an account that puts money there, if their perspective is the only way I can deploy it is when I get a mailer and I go, I think I want to give to that charity, or they go to a chicken dinner, as we call them, and they go, I'm moved to tears, I want to give to those charities, which is fine. But most of the time, especially with your people with a lot more money, they're saying, look, I just don't want to throw money into something I'm not sure of. So the idea is, we love to create opportunities for people who have an experience and have an appetite to say, look, I want to be generous. I'm eager to be generous, but I'm also interested in being able to do it in some creative ways. And so they've always been taught the traditional, the proverbial go to church, the passing of the plate. I guess I put money in there and that's what happens. Yep. Or, again, I go to a gala, or maybe there's a fundraising event and that. So they've always seen that. And that certainly is fine. I mean, that is part of it. But are there more intuitive, creative ways that can do that? And that's why we think it just helps us with our deployment narrative. It helps us create more avenues, more choices for someone to go, I really actually have a way now to deploy the money that God has given me. So that's generally.
Well, and two things I'll throw out on that. One is, I think God has an intention for a lot of people to be involved in that way. Like, they're sitting on the sidelines, they're not involved in ministry, and they can invest that way. And they've got a skill set to do that and to come alongside these organizations or businesses. And I think they're missing out on that. I think God has an intention for, like, part of their purpose in this stage of life is to do that. And so it's also just activating that and showing that, and we're called for that, which is really cool. The other thing is I believe this really strongly. It's actually a better stewardship of the capital that's been entrusted to them. And I think the whole portfolio, people need money in the market to save for retirement, and they need money. They need money that has no strings attached, that they just give, and they need to give to the church. But then there's this middle ground that says, what do you do with the rest of that? Are you supporting and using your disposable income to vacation at an ecotourism resort instead of a big resort or something, whatever that might be? But also, man, can you sliver off part of your portfolio and invest in these types of things? Or if instead of just giving it to this nonprofit, can you loan it to them at a 0% interest rate, for example? And then you get that back and you're able to gift it back out again. And so challenging nonprofits and ministries to think about fiscal self-sustainability in the long haul and not being on that proverbial need for philanthropic dollars. There's soup kitchens out there, and there's organizations like there's no business model and they need that philanthropic money. And then there's opportunities that elsewise. And what you guys are doing is you're creating the capital to do that, and inspiring people to do it. And then people are called to different portions of that. So I couldn't agree with you more on the fact that that's needed. And we're excited to be kind of on the front lines of that with you guys. Laurie, what would you throw in on that?
Yeah, totally with you, Ryan, on that. As a business person, I want to see my dollars put to good use. And we've been doing a giving circle that birthed out of NCF South Florida here for about 8 years. And we put nonprofits up in front of groups of people. And we see that the most funding goes towards those that have a business plan and they have some sort of sustainability built into that business plan.
Totally.
Because you can give to them and you're going to make an impact, and it's just going to grow from there. So we're continuing to see that. I was an early adopter myself on the impact investing. So when NCF first opened up the funds with Sovereign Capital, I jumped in personally and just loved the whole concept of it, using my charitable capital to do good in the world and make a return on it. I mean, what's better than that? And certainly as we look out and we think about, the next generation, that's what they care about, So we want to be there. We want to be in that space. And it's just so fun. Also, based on the portfolio that we have, I mean, we've got the restaurant that's really a church. I mean, that's pretty cool. That's happening. We've got a charter fishing boat that takes underprivileged kids out fishing with Guy Harvey, you know, this renowned fisherman. We've got solar power for undeveloped nations. We have a Bojangles franchise who saw the need for people that work for them for cars. Like they were taking the bus to work and, you know, their cars were breaking down. So they started this impact fund where they could outright give the cars, but to lend them the money that they could pay back over time and feel like they, you know, have an ownership interest in it. We've got some Christian films in the work. That's really getting hot right now. And especially on the back of the success of The Chosen with the first crowdfunding, which was also done through NCF, not NCF South Florida. But so that type of stuff, people just rally around and they want to be involved.
Totally. Yeah. And they're excited about it. Yeah. Well, it's super fun to talk about. And like I said at the beginning, I think you guys holistically are doing all the pieces of the puzzle and you're discipling in all those areas. And that's just growing through relationships. And it's going to keep having an impact, which is cool. And so hopefully those investments cycle back through with a return and they get reinvested, and you guys can look back in 30 years and say, wow, like we could have just written a check at the beginning of this whole thing and said, okay, here's a check for $100 million. And instead you guys have actually stewarded, you know, 150 million into different organizations with returns. And then the same impact was had, which is really special and really cool. So yeah, thank you guys for being on, and I'm excited about our partnership and to keep journeying with you guys on it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, Ryan. We appreciate the opportunity. Love what you're doing.
Yep. Thanks for all your help. And you are like family to us, you know, in South Florida. You definitely have your tentacles here. So maybe we'll have to get you a condo or something on the beach.
That's what Rob keeps saying. All right. Thanks, guys. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out, when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law, or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.